So we'll talk a little bit about, first off, why are we even caring about academic research? JSM is an academic conference. And so I came up, so like, why care about it? Because they seem to be very focused on the methods that they use for whatever area, in this case statistics, and not so much about the actual subject matter that they're analyzing. But I will point out that, a number of our early contributions to sabermetrics did come from academia. George Lindsay, I think people are familiar with. Pete Palmer, I think a lot of people in this room are very familiar with Hidden Game. He's an academic, actually. And so, they have made contributions. And there's also something to be said about that focus for methods and the fact that we may think about doing something one way, and they're going to think about doing it another way that may actually capture more information and more possibilities than just a simple analysis. And conversely, what's one of the purposes of our organization here is to bring academic rigor to baseball research, whether it's history, whether it's statistics. Anything about the game, we're trying to analyze it in a very studied way. Okay, so JSM, it's the largest annual gathering of statisticians in the world. It was at McCormick Place this year. They talk about a lot of things. It's an academic conference. It's probably about 75% PhDs and people who work at universities or institutional research firms like Bell Labs. It's very much high-level mathematics. I'm going to gloss over a lot of the mathematics here so that no one's like, what are you talking about?
What does joint mean in this context?
So in this context, joint is referencing to the fact that there are 6 different professional organizations that co-sponsor the conference. The American Statistical Association, the Institute for Mathematical Statistics, Stats Canada. There's a couple other organizations that I know the acronyms ENAR and WENAR, they're I think related to biostats and ecological stats. So there's a number of different organizations that co-sponsor it. That's why it's joint. So the great thing is you can find all this information online. The easy way is amstat.org. There's a meetings tab. You go to joint stat meetings. They'll have the abstract list for all the previous conferences, at least the last 10 years are up there. That's just a way to find some interesting research. So, okay. There are a ton of presentations and papers presented at this conference. Here are the ones that either I attended or was able to find information on that were related to baseball or I think could be used for baseball in some way. We'll talk about those last two last. As you can tell by the names, they are the wonderfully wordy academic titles.
Where's the colon? There always seems to be something and then a colon.
None of these actually had a colon. Oh, I take that back. I like it.
Yeah, you have to.
There's your colons ended up in the posters of all places. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'll talk about these 4 with a little more in-depth. I'll talk about 2 posters together because they're much simpler. And then we'll talk about these last 2 presentations, which were on the same level as these presentations at the conference, but because they're not directly related to baseball, we're going to just kind of talk about like where I think what they talked about can be applicable to what we have in baseball.
Those are some great titles.
Yes, they are.
The first one especially.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the first one that I should talk about, I've acronymed it SDC baseball because that's actually, the file is online for his slides. Greg Matthews is a professor at Loyola here in Chicago. And what they did is SDC stands for Statistical Disclosure Control. Basically, stats speak for handling incomplete data. So, like they looked at the Hall of Fame voting. We know a number of writers who vote for the Hall of Fame make their ballots public. we also know that not every Hall of Fame writer makes their ballot public. And so, but we do get the final percentage. So trying to figure out how those voters are voting when some are self-identifying their vote and others are not. And so he used the technique to try and analyze the different voting blocks in the stat language. It's called the latent class analysis. And he found two classes that I think we all are pretty well aware of exist within the voting block. There are writers who will vote for people who are known or highly suspected of taking steroids, and there are writers who have taken that group and said, no way, Jose, literally, so you can say no. You're not getting into the Hall of Fame. So the analysis focused on that, but it wasn't really, they didn't really focus on individual voters and individual players. And my question in italics here is, if anyone is familiar with, there's a gentleman by the name of Ryan Tibbs. I may have actually, that might be a typo on his last name. He has a Hall of Fame tracker online. It's a Google Doc spreadsheet. If you find, he's on Twitter at Mr. Tibbs, I believe. And I'm wondering how his tracker could be useful to this analysis, because I don't believe that was the data set they used, but it's possible. Okay, so the next one was a general. This was kind of general presentation on sleepy computers, apparently.
It rejected the concept.
Yeah.
SDC.
I see what happened.
Don't trip over the cord.
No, the cord came out of the wall. This laptop does not have a very good battery, so, all right, we're going to have to...
If it's going to take you a minute, I have a question.
Go ahead.
If this room were Hall of Fame voting, how many would use steroid use as a yes or no litmus test, or not?
Show of hands.
Factor or litmus test?
The litmus test?
Litmus test.
Again,
Say
factor or litmus test?
somebody who I would otherwise vote for the Hall of Fame, I'm not going to vote for because he was a steroids user. How many?
I say that, but I qualify it because there's probably a whole bunch that we don't really know about that used them. But it's like the obvious
I would
one.
just use it.
Personally, I think Bonds was a Hall of Famer before he started juicing.
I'm sure he was.
But Clemens wasn't.
Right.
Clemens was done. Dan Duquette wasn't wrong.
My feeling is I'm going to wait till they die and then maybe I'll vote them in. But I won't give them the satisfaction of being voted in while they're alive.
The one thing I would like
The
to see,
DeRocher plan.
Abby,
Yeah.
Bill James has this Brock 2,
Yeah.
where he says he can predict the fall off, but he's never done it for those steroid guys.
Yeah.
I would like to see,
Different.
Yeah, how it applies to them.
Alrighty, back in business. I'll make sure not to pull the cord out of the wall next time. Okay, so this next presentation was on, he talked predicting point differentials, and so this was trying to generalize, basically generalize the Pythag of Bill James, and not direct generalization of Bill James' Pythagorean theorem, but kind of a little broader than that. Take the scores of any game from any sport and be able to run it through a model where you can predict the winner and ideally predict what the spread would be. So that's why we have the fraction here. The scores from each team. It's +1 and +2 because when you're applying this across all sports, there are certain sports that can end with no score for either team, soccer in particular, being noted. So in that case, the +1, +1, 2, if you have a 0-0 score, at 50%, that's where it is. The model would follow a distribution we call it a beta distribution. It's similar to that classic bell curve. It's not the same as the bell curve, but it does have some similar characteristics to it. And he's still very much kind of working out the kinks of this model. It definitely seemed like he was at a point where he could present it, but not at the point where it was really useful. So. The next one's not going to exactly show up. So the third one that was interesting, so this came out of the same session, actually. And so this was a model trying to predict the outcomes of a plate appearance. They called it at bats. It's really a plate appearance. Using a technique called, using a type of regression technique that takes advantage of the fact that there's a structure that can be placed on outcomes, and also gets a little more focused into individual matchups. So that's where the nuclear penalized multiple regression comes into effect. We're not going to talk about what that is other than to say that's the name of the technique. If you want to learn more about it, I suggest reading about it.
Is that 3 true outcomes? Is that what
TTO is
the
3 true outcomes, yeah.
Okay.
So the limitations on this model was the fact that he only looked at 9 possible outcomes. And that's the ones you see here listed at the ends of the tree. So it's ground out, fly out, single, double, triple, single, double, triple, homer, hit by pitch, walk, and strike out. So they didn't really consider reach on air or any of we're not even accounting for every way to get on first base here. So, and I will say that walks does count intentional walks. But the way, what he was able to do with the technique was he was able to identify player types. And I thought this was actually kind of interesting. So batter types, he was able to identify 3 groups. You have your 3 true outcomes, your Jack Cuss, Rob Deers of the world, who do nothing but strike out, hit homers, or walk. Your power guys who get lots of extra base hits, and your disciplined guys who are usually your high batting average guys. For pitching types, you have command, Maddox, contact guys who are either good at either high K rates or just put a lot of balls in play. And then trajectory is your fly ball, ground ball pitcher. Okay. This next one was on pitch framing. And he directly cited Harry Pavlidis' work to quantify pitch framing. And his main critique of it, and I think it's a misunderstanding of what they put up at Baseball Prospectus, is that there's no uncertainty to their estimates. I know that there's uncertainty there, but the way Baseball Prospectus presents their numbers, it looks like a very certain estimate, even though it's probably just, this is your mean, this is like what we actually think the value, it's like our predictions. This is what we think is going to happen, but the range of possibilities is much wider. So he used used a Bayesian hierarchical model, hence the first 2 words of the title here, to help identify, try to really truly identify the pitch framing skill. So looked at strikes and built the model, and that had pitch location count, who was batting, and they even accounted for the catcher and the umpire to determine, okay, is there a catch framing skill, and to what magnitude is that skill, and is there a lot of difference between given catchers? They measured the skill off of what they considered a baseline catcher, replacement level. It's really like a replacement level catcher. It's not average. So that's your concept if you're familiar with WAR and all those metrics, that's the same idea. And what he showed with his intervals, what he actually showed, he did show the intervals, and it shows that, you know, his point estimate at the middle of the interval, middle of that possible window, is pretty similar to what these other framing metrics are showing. But when you put the confidence interval on his estimates, it doesn't show a lot of difference between some of his catchers. It does show that, yes, they have the skill, but one of the charts he showed was comparing, if you looked at, I think, Hank Conger and I think it was Mesoraco were the two players, and both of them were very high. Both of them were like if you looked at the rank, the point at the estimate of skill, I think it was like 15 to 14 runs saved. So I mean, something of a gap. But when you looked at what the window, like the confidence interval, like what's the possible range of actual true skill here, they were very similar, and they both went up from like down from like 1 run saved to 25 runs saved for both of them. Something to keep in mind when you're looking at these new metrics and their estimates, and just remembering that this is a point of a range of possibilities, because we are only looking at a sample of their skill when they play the game.
Does that have something to do with the fact that some of these, there's a greater range of possible variability among that particular player, and much less range of variability in another player?
Some of it is with that.
So if you look at the means, that doesn't take into account that you're gonna much more likely to get this actual figure, because they're not gonna vary that much.
Right.
This one, you're not really quite sure. It might be much better, it might be much
And
worse.
when you're looking at catchers, a lot of that variability when we're measuring comes from the number of pitches. So, okay, so the two posters, pretty brief and quick. One was trying to measure the quality of pitch. He built, this is actually probably a simpler model than anything else I talked about today. Incorporated movement, location, and speed, all derived off of the PitchFX data that we love from MLB, from BAM. And he also accounted for the pitcher to count the base out state. And as I was putting this together, I realized I never took a picture of the actual poster, and I was kicking myself for that. So he had 5 minutes to talk about his work, not a lot of time to talk about the results, and not having the poster. I can't comment on what he found. The other poster I did get a picture of, and it's a shame that Evan had to leave early, because this is very similar to what he's looking at. So a couple, the second one was actually given by a couple high school kids. Forget it. Outlet. I don't know why that outlet keeps going out, but it does. Anyway, so it's just telling me I need a new battery on my laptop. I do, but I'm also, this laptop's old enough where it's like, do I really want to get a new battery, or do I just get a new laptop? So the other poster presentation, as this is bringing up, was given by a couple of high school kids. They got to do some summer consulting work for a similar college summer league team. Theirs is the Martha's Vineyard Sharks of the Futures Collegiate Baseball League, which is an East Coast that league. I would guess that they are, based on Evan's assertion, they are a slightly lower level than the Prospect League. But they tried to rate offensive production, and so they looked at 3 different metrics. They were able to get the data from the team directly. So quality play appearances, which was simply just a rating given to each batter as they batted by the coach in the dugout. It was a 1 to 5 scale, so like great, average. Same with the hard hit ball rate, and then OPS, on base plus slugging. And they kind of came up with a Bill James type overall production index that was 50% this quality plate appearance metric and 50% OPS. And one of the things they acknowledged that they ran into, and Evan kind of talked about this too, was sample size issues, because you have players that show up late because of the college seasons, you have players that leave early because school starts at the beginning of August, you have, or other various reasons, hey, I gotta go actually make some money type of reasons. So they acknowledge some of that in their ratings. It was, personally, to see high school kids at a conference like this, I think it's fantastic. I actually got to meet the teacher as well, and he's real excited and has them kind of trying to navigate into the crevices of sports analytics that aren't being explored by a lot of people. So not only are they looking at these little smaller indie collegiate baseball leagues, also looking at other sports like lacrosse and ultimate frisbee. So, okay, the last thing I want to talk about are these two other presentations that we're actually talking about the optical tracking data in basketball. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Sport Field. Stats LLC, John DeLone's baby that he founded, is he no longer owns, but they are holding true to his vision. And they have this product called Sport View that the NBA uses in all 30 arenas. Baseball just introduced StatCast this year. It's the same idea. Track the movement of everything on the field of play. And so these two guys are, first off, they're incredibly smart. I'm just going to say that. They have, XY Research is their kind of research house. They, so you can go, it's xyresearch.com. You can actually go look at a lot of their work. It is focused on basketball, but I think there is some applications here. So Alex Marks, his was that Pixels to Points presentation that was really just talking about how do we handle all this optical tracking data. And the idea is space matters. You know, where people are in relation to everyone else, in relation to the field. It matters. And I think when we start really, like when they're able to start really digging into the StatCast data, not saying the teams haven't already done this, but if it ever gets public, I think one of the big questions to ask about that is, like when we start asking those defensive positioning questions, and this kind of maybe ties into the second presentation, it's like, how do we determine who's responsible for what territory, given like what's your shift? So if we're going to tell guys to shift and have the second baseman in short right field, okay, Danny Espinosa, you're responsible for everything from the lip of the infield to maybe halfway to the fence, and then your right fielder's responsible. Your right fielder is responsible for everything from there all the way to the fence, and maybe those types of instructions. There's a lot we can learn from the research that's already been done in basketball. So I think that's that. And any questions? I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep. I see learning still awake, so I know I'm good there.
Good.
Which of these impressed you the most?
Which one impressed me the most? A lot of the optical tracking stuff for basketball was really impressive, as far as the ones that were more directly applied to baseball. I will say that the nuclear, the third one here, that one I thought was really good, because I think to me having better techniques for predicting outcomes of at bats can lead to better simulations, can lead to better forecasting, can maybe lead to baseball prospectus not having that 0.45 correlation, or improving, enhancing. Insert your favorite baseball sim program here, Mogul, Out of the Park, Diamond Line. That one I think is probably the easiest to see. I personally don't understand enough about the regression technique to be able to evaluate it against some of the other ones. They did walk through that. They started with just multinomial, like a couple other like simpler techniques and kind of worked their way up to it. So I'm not quite sure. This could be the ideal technique, could be the ideal way to analyze, and at that, there might be something else though.
This is a little outside what you were talking about here, but
Go ahead.
you're probably aware of it, but Rob Manfred
Yeah.
has just come out with like a press release where he's talking about possibly next year limiting shifts.
He's done. Do we have like about 5 minutes for me to go through this about? Okay.
I wanted to know what you think of that, what effect that would have on the
So
He didn't really go into specifics.
right, each one is its own beast. The 20-second limit, I think, is the easiest to tackle because A, it's already on the books, technically, and B, I think it's one of the rules that is because it's already on the books. It's also one of the least enforced rules on the books. I really think the only effect, as far as like a fan experience, that'll probably help pace of play the most. As far as the impact on what happens on the field, at least initially, I would see it continuing to help the pitcher, and we're in the pitcher-dominated era, which might be a hesitancy for MLB to do it.
It would help the defense behind it even more because they have their tools.
They would probably, that's, I think, another byproduct of why it would help pitching and defense more. I do think batters would adjust to varying degrees depending on, how much they like their routines. I have a sense, and I don't want to really be, I have a sense that your Latin players would probably have a harder time adjusting as opposed to your American players, simply because cultures, Americans much more of a go-go culture, Latins much more relaxed. That's my thought there. Shifts, there's, I think what's starting to happen, and we haven't fully started, I don't think we've hit the tipping point yet. But you do see batters trying to, quote unquote, beat the shift more. And I think I don't think that's quite played itself out to a sort of equilibrium state between, okay, how often should I shift, when should I shift, can this person beat the shift? And so I think limiting shifts isn't necessarily the best idea as far as like the long-term health of the game. I think there'd be an artificial limit put on something that even now it's sort of where do you define? I guess in that case you'd have to come up with a definition for shift. Like how much? Are you going to define the shift as distance? Now that we have StatCast data, are you going to define the shift as distance away from traditional fielding position, or are you going to define it as kind of overall fielding? Where okay, if you have more than 2 infielders on any one side of the bag, that's a shift. That's where I think it gets a little complicated because, what's a team going to do if you tell them they can't put 3 on the first base side of second base? They're probably just going to take the shortstop, have him like one step to the shortstop to the left field side of second base. And they probably won't lose much money. And so legally it won't be a shift under that player definition, but it's still a shift. So
It just strikes me that whole argument is so crazy. Is there another sport that tells the defense on their side of the field where they can position their players? Is there any other sport that does that? Doesn't the game take care of that? Isn't that what football is all about? They're constantly, If you decide you want to put everybody on this side of the line, you can do it, you know? It ain't gonna work, but you can
Even
do
like
it.
in kickoffs and
You know,
returns,
it's
they all
like,
kind of bunch up together.
it just seems insane to me. I guess it was slowing the game down or something, you might argue, but.
I think the shift is a direct result of some of the sabermetrics that have come out the last 20 years.
So the offense always
basically-
adapts.
Which basically gives you the three term outcome: walk, hit, home run, walk, strikeout, home run, and so people
Right.
have been hitting for that for years, and then they said, okay, well, if you're gonna do that, and we got tendencies, we're just gonna put people where you hit the ball all the time.
Yep.
Oh,
You know?
and by the way, somebody who has that profile, right, who's making a certain amount of money, I can spend some time teaching you a skill that's learnable, right, if you're willing to learn it, that allows you to guarantee a hit virtually every time, right? And you're not telling me people aren't going to be motivated to do that. Offense, defense, they always adjust, right?
It's just a full cycle thing. I think it's gonna come back where they're gonna have to teach their players in their minor leagues that you're gonna have to learn how to spray the ball, like they used to do. Before the chicks take the long ball came around.
Or where's fashionable now to teach player variation, not just define a player as a second baseman or an outfielder, like, well, gee, if you could do two of these things, suddenly you're more valuable to the team. You have to take time to learn it, you have to instruct, you have to be willing to do it. Maybe not everyone can do it, but a lot of people could, but if you don't ever try, then it never can happen.
We're in a power era right now, and I think we're starting to reach the point to where you're gonna start seeing people and players go a little bit away from the power and it's almost as if the game theory says, because no one's doing it, kind of like it's the knuckleball idea too. Not a lot of people do it, so if I'm the guy who's trying to be the pinpoint control master and I can get those strikes and get these guys off balance just on count alone, because all they're trying to do is whack it as hard as they can and not necessarily an approach of, okay, they don't necessarily have the bat control to do some of the things that they may want to try and do. There's that.
Well, if there was evidence that there was this dramatic drop in offense, I don't see any evidence of that. Right?
Well, home runs have gone down simply because people are being tested for steroids.
Exactly. I mean, that's direct.
But this byproduct, the shift byproduct, the shift is a byproduct of that era of I'm just going to pull the ball and hit it as far as I can because, I'm 5 times stronger than I should be or whatever.
Right.
And I just think that eventually with shifts, I think it just makes everything go full circle and then you come back to the people that can spray the ball. Personally, I've never actually seen this, and there could be metrics, I'm not that deep into it, but to me, I think the next era is the RBI production. Okay? Can you just give me a guy that can drive in runs? I don't care if he hits 5 homers, 25 homers, but if he can drive in 100 runs a year from whatever he bats, whatever position he hits in, that's going to be the person all of a sudden. I'm going to go on a limb and call it the Tommy Herr thing, because Tommy Herr would drive in 100 runs with the Cardinals, he did 10 homers every year. And I think that's the next era of this, of spraying the ball, just
Well,
drive it
But what's interesting,
but the statistic wouldn't be RBIs, it would be percentage of RBIs in RBI opportunities,
Yeah.
right? Because we all know it's an opportunity
Right.
statistic,
Correct.
right? So that'd be something like that, yeah.
yeah, and what's interesting is one of the other things Stack has really brought before are launch angles. And you see a lot of guys trying to work their swings into this, trying to construct swings so that when the ball comes off, it's launching, I want to say 10 to 20 degrees off the bat. I think 20 degrees is like about your home run sweet spot as far as like launch angle. And so they're trying to do that. The biggest shift of all players this year, like one of the biggest shifts in that this year, last year, this year is Altuve. It's one of the reasons his home runs are up so much. So there's that. The third thing you asked about was, okay, we talked about shifts, relief pitchers. That one, I think it would be, from a fan perspective, I think it'd be a good thing, because the other big pick up and pace of play is that late inning switch. It's amazing how, and I don't know if anyone's actually looked at this now that I'm thinking about it. You might be able to do it with the game day data. But looking at how quickly, like how much time is spent during each inning early in the game versus late in the game. And my assumption is that if someone were to look at that, you would, I just even, the last few games I've been to, the first 6 innings, like clock, and I'm looking at the clock and thinking, hey, I may not have to leave this game early to catch my 10:30 train out of the Union Station while I'm sitting in the cell. Or the G spot, or whatever you want to call that concrete edifice now. And then you get to the 7th inning, and all of a sudden, whereas 6 innings maybe were played in about hour 15, that 7th inning, all of a sudden, the first half goes 25 minutes, and the second half goes 25 minutes. And it's like, and they've scored maybe 1 run apiece. And it's because of matchup pitching change. So I do think from a fan experience, it's a worthwhile to explore. From a game strategy perspective, it would be a very interesting constraint to see how managers would adapt and how front offices would adapt.
You'd see closers coming early.
I-
There was the
you
absolute, can you pinpoint through statistics when is the absolute
Yeah.
time to have him out there to pitch? That's when he would be out there.
You might see more expectation. You might see, like, if they limit it to, mid-inning stretches, for instance, you would probably see, okay, we know, given who's coming up, you wouldn't have your dedicated 9th inning guy. Your Houston Street couldn't exist in that environment because you would have to have, like, if you've got a 7th inning and your batters are, and I'm going to go hypothetical dream scenario here. We're going to say Altuve, Harper, and Trout. Not that all 3 will ever end up on the same team outside of an all-star game. But you're probably going to want your best pitcher to face those 3 guys.
Yeah, that's where, I mean, those statistics exist, but they're not publicly used like the SABR is. But once you get that publicly used and everybody sees that and they go, you led the league in this key situation statistic, then I think you start to compensate the players for their real value, right? You're starting to see some of that now. And I think then the management moves away from that. But right now the players have to be resistant because if I'm called a closer, I'm going to make a lot more money still than if I'm not.
Well, and part of that is still ball player psychology. There's still, I think there's still a comfort for ball players to have a role and know what the role is. And they know what situation they're coming into and they're tuned to that situation.
But that's a developmental thing.
Right.
Just like developing a player who can feel comfortable shifting positions in the middle of a game.
Yeah.
Nobody turns to that player and says, we're making an unrealistic demand. No, I know how to play both positions. It's no big deal, right? Or you could say, no, that would really throw me off. I can't do that, right? But there's some training there, and if you basically train that, and when players are young and they want to get to the big leagues, they're desperate to get to the big leagues, they're quite open to at least trying things, right? So but they have to be compensated fairly, right? If they're not going to be compensated for what they're doing, then they're going to say, no, I want to be a closer.
And then when you go back to the way the relief pitchers used to be, like when Gossage and Suter, they used to come in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning, because the 7th inning was when they needed them, because like you said, the situation called for your best pitcher at that time. And they would come in and pitch 3 innings.